So first and foremost, I just want to really thank everybody for being here. This is a really important project that we've been working on for a while. And every time we talk about climate issues, people say, well, how are you going to fund it? How are we going to move things forward? And we all know that the answer is we've got to find a way. And so I just want to thank you for being here as the chair of SCTA, RCPA. And I want to kick it over to my great colleague who's been leading this effort on the ad hoc committee, our vice chair, Supervisor Hopkins.
Thank you so much, Chair Rogers. And so I'm just going to share really briefly what the purpose of this meeting is. First of all, we want you to know that we are actually serious about securing funding for what is really truly the greatest crisis of our lifetimes. We feel a really strong sense of urgency, and we really want to move the needle forward. If I were you right now in those seats, what I'd probably be thinking about is, we've heard politicians talk about climate change. It seems like everybody cares, but we haven't seen the action that we want. And, how is this going to be different from every other committee or, promise or, process that we have all been through together? And we have a goal, right? We have a timeline, we have a goal. We want to move forward with some kind of funding initiative that will secure local sources of funding that we hope to then match with state and federal funding opportunities to really make a difference and drive ourselves towards carbon neutrality by 2030 as a county. What's really cool about this is we have RCPA leading the charge, right? Counties, cities at the table, all working together, rowing in the same direction. But the second part and the second purpose of this meeting is that we actually want you to drive the process. So that is what we are really here also to do today, is to tell you that we want you to join these committees. And you'll hear a little bit about the committees and the structure that we have come up with to really sort of look at different buckets and different focuses of funding. So we want you to participate in and actually drive this process that would then ultimately go to the board of directors for consideration. And we haven't decided on the funding structure yet. And that's been a question that many folks have asked me. That will be sort of phase 2 after we come up with what do we want to see? What do we want to create through this process? What are the projects that we want to accomplish? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our awesome team. Is it going to be everybody? Okay, all right, kick it off. Yeah, now we're going to trade the spots.
Hybrid meetings are fun.
Yeah. I always felt like a game show host.
Yeah. But at least we don't have the drunk owl effect where the thing starts spinning and picking up whatever sound is. And you're going to do this one. It's easy. Start spinning.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Oh, all right. Okay. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to give a huge shout out to Chair Rogers and Vice Chair Hopkins for being here. Am I far enough? Really appreciate all of their support and leadership. We can't do this work without our fantastic elected officials who dedicate so much of their time and energy to this climate work and to the climate emergency. So my name is Tanya Narath, and I'm the Director of Climate Programs for the RCPA. And what I'd like to do to start us off tonight is just provide some background in terms of the framework that RCPA has put into place with the leadership of our board that's going to guide these efforts going forward from here. And I think some of you or many of you have already heard about some of this information or this strategy, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's see, Ross, if you can go to the next slide with the graph on it. Actually, let me just go through the agenda real quickly. So we've done the welcome and meeting purpose. I'm going to go through our climate goal and strategy, and then I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, Suzanne Smith, to talk about the kind of approach that we've decided to use to tackle this work. And then Ross is going to close out with how you all get involved. And hopefully by the end of this evening, you will be inspired and ready to sign up for at least one of the 3 committees that we have. So next slide, please, Ross. So in terms of our climate goals, so beginning with the city of Petaluma in 2019, all of our local jurisdictions and the RCPA have adopted climate emergency resolutions, really recognizing the climate crisis that we face. So in follow-up to the adoption, and RCPA adopted a climate emergency resolution as well. And in follow-up to the adoption of that climate emergency resolution, our board directed staff to develop a new climate strategy to show how it is that we can achieve our ambitious goal of being carbon neutral by 2030. So this chart here shows how our greenhouse gas emissions have changed over time. And you can see that we're generally heading in the right direction. Our challenge is we're not heading in that direction fast enough. So we just recently released our 2020 greenhouse gas inventory, and that showed that we had reduced our emissions almost 23% below 1990 levels in 2020, which is good. But again, we need to do much more. And so the light green line, that's probably not quite strong enough for you to see, but that shows the path that we must take if we are to achieve our 2030 carbon neutrality goal. And you may wonder, why doesn't that line go all the way to zero? Shouldn't it go all the way to zero? Well, ideally it would, but we recognize that the challenge of stopping burning fossil fuels is pretty large, and we don't think we can get all the way there by 2030. And so that gap that you see there between the 80% below 1990 levels and zero is what we intend to address by pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere through what's known as carbon sequestration. So that's how we intend to make up that gap. So next slide, please, Ross. Oh, if our computer wakes up. So the next slide is going to go through a couple of the highlights of our Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy. And it consists of several key initiatives in transportation, buildings, and then something we call land and water. And so to support our goal, this strategy has a number of different objectives and actions, there it is, to achieve that 2030 goal that we've set. And so we start out by focusing on transportation and buildings because they are the largest emitters from our greenhouse gas inventory. As of 2020, our transportation was 58% of our total emissions, and buildings produced 23% of the total emissions. So those are our big sectors or groups of emissions that we need to address. And then our third initiative, land and water, which you can probably guess by the titles of those strategies around protecting and increasing carbon stocks, is really focused on improving our ecosystem services so that we can increase the amount of carbon that we're pulling out of the atmosphere and keep it locked in. So not having things like destructive wildfires occur that release all of that carbon into the atmosphere. And then finally, and most importantly, you'll see there on the lower portion of the slide, we refer to equity and environmental justice and community engagement. And that's really a key reason we brought all of you here together in the room and virtually, is to help us ensure that in everything that we do as we move forward over the next couple of years, we are incorporating and really integrating those elements into the work that we do so that we're not leaving anyone behind as we do this work. So now, Ross, if you could go to the next slide, I'd like to share a little bit more about each of these initiative areas. So first, transportation, and I have to say, I think this is one of our biggest challenge areas. And so we have three strategies here that we are embarking upon. And in order to reduce pollution from transportation, we need to do all of these things. So we need to reduce the number of miles that we drive. We need to switch from driving around in fossil fuel powered vehicles to zero emission vehicles, electric and other. And we need to find new funding sources to support these strategies that we need to put into place. So our Drive Less Sonoma County campaign, as it sounds, is aimed at making it easier and safer for all of us to get around the county without having to get into a car. And objectives that we've outlined here include implementing a complete network of low stress bike and pedestrian paths, implementing a Vision Zero action plan or plans across the county, and improving our transit services so that they truly do provide an alternative to driving a car. Then our EV Access for All partnership focuses on, for trips that you can't make walking, biking, or taking transit, shifting us from those high polluting emitting vehicles, fossil fuel powered vehicles, to electric vehicles. And we say access for all because this strategy is really important to focus on making these options available to all members of our community so that it's not just those who can afford to buy an electric vehicle that can be part of this strategy, but looking for ways to make EVs more affordable, looking at solutions like micromobility solutions. So you may have seen the bird scooters scooting around Santa Rosa. So those kinds of mobility options that are lighter weight, lower cost, how can we implement those successfully? And then of course we need to electrify our transit buses, our school buses, our construction vehicles, from top to bottom, we need to electrify. And then lastly, this vehicle miles traveled mitigation bank sounds complicated, and I think it probably is going to be complicated to implement. but this is all about finding new funding sources to fund these transportation systems and processes that we want to put into place. So that's our transportation sector. And next up, we have buildings. So Ross, if you could go to the next slide. So here we need to act in two areas. So there's electrifying our buildings, both existing buildings and new construction. So we have our all electric buildings campaign, and then carbon-free electricity. So in terms of buildings, we need obviously to stop burning fossil fuels for space and water heating. And several of our cities have already taken steps to do this in new construction buildings. There we go. Have taken steps by adopting ordinances that require all electric and new construction. And our California building code in each cycle is getting closer and closer to all electric construction requirements as well. Of course, we'd like that to happen faster, but that is the direction it's heading in. And then we also need to increase the energy efficiency and electrify our existing buildings. And similar to transportation, I think our existing building stock is our large challenge, figuring out how to do that at the speed and scale that we need to do, and to do that in an equitable way so that it's affordable for everyone. And these actions will need to be taken for all building types. So our local governments are already looking at how to electrify their municipal buildings. And we need to take this action in residential and commercial and industrial spaces as well. And then second, we need to continue cleaning up our electricity supply. So that's the carbon-free electricity. And we've made great progress on this already. We're sitting here at the center of Sonoma Clean Power's world, and made great progress in terms of cleaning up our electricity supply. And that's why our building energy emissions have dropped actually 49% from 1990 to 2020. So we've made huge progress there and want to continue till we have 100% clean energy. And I also want to give a shout out to Healdsburg Electric, which is Healdsburg's utility. They are also taking similar kinds of steps that Sonoma Clean Power has taken. So also seeing reductions. And then lastly, in this area, I want to call out that taking actions here, and actually in transportation as well, is not only important for emissions and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, it's critical for the health of our community. Our existing buildings, if you're using a gas stove to cook your meals, you're emitting pollutants into your home. So switching to an induction cooktop, clean electricity is really a key piece of improving indoor air quality. Likewise, if we stop driving vehicles around that are spewing pollutants, we're going to help clean up our air. And then seeing Eris sitting there, who I know rode her bike here this evening, riding bikes, walking, taking transit is so good for our own health and our community's health. So these are really critical strategies. So lastly, I'd like to go through the land and water, and Ross is already there. Thank you. And so this one is all about taking actions that improve the health of our ecosystems so that they can continue to capture carbon and provide the many co-benefits that we know these spaces provide to us: recreation, clean water, healthy soils, resilience to drought and other natural disasters. So there's three strategies here. Protecting existing carbon stocks is exactly what it sounds like, and that's through doing things like doing vegetation management and managing our forests to reduce the risk of wildfires, and minimizing the loss of natural and working lands that are conserving or sequestering that carbon. Increasing carbon stocks includes a range of strategies in both our rural and urban landscapes. So these are examples like our resource conservation districts. And actually here in the room, we have a whole team, I think, from our wonderful resource conservation districts. And they're already doing a lot of work with our local ag producers to develop and implement carbon farm plans that are basically ways that local landowners can implement practices like composting, no-till farming, putting in hedgerows that are shown scientifically to increase carbon sequestration and keep the carbon in the landscape. And then lastly, we need to secure, again, the common theme, secure more resources to do this necessary work. And that's not only funding, it's also, do we have the trained workforce to implement these practices? Do we have the raw materials like the compost and the nursery plants and all of that to actually do this work? And so that's the third piece. So as you can see, as we've gone through these different strategies, we have a lot of work to do together to meet our 2030 goal. And to be successful, we need to engage our entire community in this work, as well as secure additional funding for our local initiatives. So before I turn it over to our Executive Director, Suzanne Smith, who's going to go through our approach to do this work and how all of you can get involved, we'd like to share a short video. So I'll turn it over to Ross to cue that up.
Sonoma County has always been a very climate-forward community. We started RCPA a number of years ago as the first regional body in the state that was coalescing around climate solutions.
We are a coalition of jurisdictions from throughout Sonoma County. So the cities and the county all at the same table, really tasked with trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions right here in Sonoma County.
Most communities don't have this entity or this type of joint authority. So we are really at the forefront of communities across California doing this work, studying the impacts of climate, and also coming up with creative solutions to implement. And where we're at right now is that we have really great plans, but in order to deploy them and deploy them effectively, where we can really solve some of these challenges, we're going to need to go out and find funding.
It's impossible to live in Sonoma County and to have not been impacted by climate change, whether it's folks that lost their homes or even just that unease and that uncertainty that we all feel every time the wind picks up and the humidity drops. We all know what a red flag warning is. We all know what a public safety power shutoff is. Those are disasters that have been exacerbated by climate change, and we feel the impact and we feel the cost. Do we pass a tax measure, find a funding source that allows us to make that proactive investment in solutions that are going to solve climate change for us? Or are we going to wait and still spend that same amount of money on the back end trying to help people recover what they've already lost?
Our climate impacts right here in Sonoma County are not only going to mean more frequent and severe wildfires, but also more frequent and severe droughts, and interestingly, also more frequent and severe floods. So this is kind of feels like a contradiction in terms, but the fact is that we're going to get more atmospheric rivers in the winter that come here and dump a ton of precipitation that can cause large swaths of western Sonoma County to flood, while at the same time not getting quite enough rain to soak into the ground to replenish our groundwater storage.
We also have to have a real conversation, because putting a plan on the table doesn't matter if people don't actually implement it. How do we fund it, and what is the community willing to actually do as individuals and as organizations to drive these solutions forward?
We really need to be focused here in Sonoma County on resilience. So we need to be looking at things like home hardening, because ultimately we need to make sure that residents are prepared for wildfire if and when it comes.
It's not just transportation. It's not just wildfire mitigation or vegetation management. It's really across a number of sectors. It's electrifying our homes to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that are happening in the places that we live or in the places that we work. Also reducing our water usage. There's a number of ways in which individuals and communities can step up and do the work. Sometimes this stuff costs money, and obviously the more expensive it is, the more it will impact our low-income community, and the effects of climate often trickle down to impacting our most vulnerable residents. And so as we continue down this path and as we're developing plans and implementing them, we want to ensure that all voices are able to participate in this process and really feel empowered to tell us, their elected leaders, what does our community need to solve these challenges and to do it in a way that meets individual needs and meets the moment that we're living in now.
One of the worst things about climate change is that it often impacts those the most who are least prepared and can least afford to be resilient to those impacts. And so when you look at the impacts of climate change, you see that socioeconomically disadvantaged communities, often communities of color, are hardest hit by those climate impacts. So with this funding, we could really look at making equity investments.
What are the ways that we are impacted by climate, by wildfires, by our drought, and how are we studying, developing plans, and how are we implementing those plans at building a more resilient community and a place where we can all feel so excited to be raising our kids here, for folks to retire here, and to feel that Sonoma County is sustainable and resilient.
I really want to invest in Sonoma County to make it beautiful and vibrant and resilient for future generations. I want to see a Sonoma County where kids and families can safely walk and bike to school, can walk and bike to beautiful park facilities, and where you don't actually have to get into a car to get around.
Oftentimes, cities' budgets are stretched thin, and in particular, the smaller cities in Sonoma County have a desire to be a part of climate solutions, but oftentimes don't have the resources that they need for the planning, for the expertise, nor for the implementation. By funding measures through the RCPA, it allows us to bring together good ideas, filter through the best ones, and then help all of our jurisdictions from Cloverdale to Petaluma to make sure that we are all being a part of climate solutions here in Sonoma County.
I really do believe that the future of Sonoma County is bright. We face a lot of challenges. We're looking at drought, we're looking at wildfires, we're looking at floods, and the passion that we have in the community and the creativity that we have in the community, that's what's going to carry us forward. The values in Sonoma County are something that we all share, and we all believe in creating a vibrant and resilient Sonoma County for future generations.
I'm Suzanne Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and the Regional Climate Protection Authority. Sachet over here. So there are a couple things I wanted to touch on. The first is climate change isn't a thing. It isn't a policy area. It is in all of the policy areas that we work on here in local government. And so that makes it more interesting in a lot of ways, but it makes it a lot more challenging, especially when you try to hone in on what to do and how to do it and how to be most effective. The other thing that is special about Sonoma County in so many ways is how willing our community is to fund the things that matter to them and to know that their local government is going to be responsive and hear them when they talk about what their priorities are and be efficient and effective in delivering solutions when they entrust us with local money. So we've seen it with libraries, we've seen it with open space, transportation, mental health. It's a, I think a testament to our community about being willing to put our money where our mouth is and to do that work. What it means though is that comes with a lot of responsibility. And to be able to hear from the community and give back to them what they're saying they need and want, that's it's been my pleasure to do that on the transportation side for much of my career. And I'm excited about the opportunity to talk to the community in greater depth about how we might do something similar on the climate side. We've created a structure looking at the 3 policy areas you heard about earlier, because trying to like herd those cats or put socks on that octopus of what all of those policy areas are is really challenging. But it felt like these 3 buckets of transportation, buildings, and land and water are really where the sweet spots are for local action and local, the kind of highest and best use should we have the opportunity to use local money for those areas. So we started with that concept. And so this diagram is really meant to show you how we've been thinking about it structurally. And it's a sort of bottoms up approach. So you see like the bulk of the focus here is the work of some committees. I mean, we are a government, so we do have process and we do have committees. And the idea here is to not say, okay, this is a committee of 7 people and here's who they are. This is meant to be open to anyone and everyone who's interested in these various policy areas. And then you notice sort of encircled by this, and Tanya touched on it, is the role of environmental justice and ensuring that the committees are fully representative of our community, but also that they get the training they need around environmental justice. So we'll be providing resources for the committees throughout the process to ensure that we are doing a good job and a responsible job ensuring environmental justice is incorporated into these discussions. Above that sort of bulk of the work is a steering committee made up of the chairs of those program committees, as well as the leadership from the SCTA and RCPA board. And just to take a quick step back in case anyone isn't deeply familiar with what we do at the Regional Climate Protection Authority. It is all of the cities and the county coming together in a separate governmental entity where our board of directors has a city council member from each of the cities, 3 members of the board of supervisors. And it's this collaborative body where we learn and share and develop policy and then implement those priorities. So the RCPA board is up there at the top leading this, and they're the entity that actually has the authority to consider a tax revenue of some sort, the funding mechanism to be determined, as Supervisor Hopkins mentioned, but also to develop an expenditure plan. Like, what is it that we want to do most, and what can we direct our local dollars to, and what can we leverage those local dollars with at the state and federal level? So that's the structure. And then I would also mention over on this on the side here is our government partners. So I mentioned the collaborative nature of RCPA. There's a lot of deep knowledge in this community from local government. We've got the community side, we've also got the local experts on the government side, and we really want to ensure that all of that gets brought together as we develop options and ideas to put forward to the elected officials. So the next slide, please. And it's almost 2023, yay. So here's the schedule that we've laid out. One of the things I just want to start with is we're doing work now. So this isn't like, let's start. There's a lot of work happening in the climate realm as we speak across various policy areas. We're going to keep doing that work over the next couple of years. But in addition to that, the outreach and engagement to develop and fully form that community vision for a local revenue measure, as well as what those priority solutions will be, is going to happen in 2023, leading into the beginning of 2024. And just so everyone's aware of sort of the schedule constraints, if we want to place something on the ballot in 2024, November of 2024, it needs to pretty much be wrapped up with a bow by May, end of May at the latest. So that sounds far away. Still, you start putting meetings together and figuring out how that process could work out. So this is the big picture schedule that gets us to a consideration for the board in probably the May, June timeframe to decide on whether or not to move forward. So with that, the next slide, I'm going to hand it over to Ross to dive more deeply into how community engagement is going to happen, and grateful for your participation tonight. Thank you for being here in person and online. And
thank you very much, and thank you all for your patience with technical stuff today. So basically, I wanted to show you some ways how you can get involved with this process. So I'll go over the committee interest form and some other ways that you could participate in RCPA activities and lend your voice to the effort moving forward. Excellent. So our goal for today is to have those interested fill out the committee interest form. This online form allows you to select the committee or committees that you're interested in, and also provide us with basic contact information. I know many of you have already done that, so much appreciated. I do also have a physical sign-up sheet if anyone wants to go old school. And we do allow folks to sign up for multiple sectors. It's really kind of depends how much time you're willing and able to put into it. But we're not restricting that. And in terms of logistics, we're hoping that committee members can attend meetings once per month in 2023. We're really hoping for consistent committee membership. That way recommendations could be better developed for submission at the end of the year. And also, if you're new to RCPA or just want to get more involved, beyond these committees, we also have our regular activities. So we recommend certainly sign up to get our newsletter, social media. I can help you with that if you have any questions. But also, I recommend that you participate in the RCPA Climate Action Advisory Committee. This is a quarterly meeting. It's a committee that provides input and feedback regarding RCPA activities throughout the year. So the public is welcome to attend CEAA meetings and provide comments. And please see the RCPA website for more information on that. And without further ado, we do want to introduce the committee leads that have been selected so far. So we will start with someone in the room right now. Lifelong environmentalist Eris Weaver is the executive director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. Her past jobs include organic baker, newspaper carrier, medical librarian, dancer, graphic recorder, and organization development consultant. She and her wife live at the Frog Song Co-housing in Catania. And also in the room with us, Dr. Alexa Forrester is an environmental philosopher and professor at Santa Rosa Junior College. She currently serves as co-lead for the Bikeable Santa Rosa campaign and volunteers with other climate and community organizations, including Santa Rosa Southeast Greenway, Sonoma County Sunrise, and 350 Sonoma. She lives with her husband and 2 sons in Santa Rosa. And Buildings Committee. Ann Edminster is a green building consultant, laser focused on decarbonizing homes and communities. Trained as an architect, she facilitates design teams, coaches other building practitioners, works on research projects, teaches, develops education programs, and rabble rouses in the climate space in her spare time. And also Panama Bartholomew is the director of the Building Decarbonization Coalition, a multi-sector forum advocating for and creating solutions for our pollution-intensive building stock. He's previously served as the European Director of the Investor Confidence Project, the advisor on energy and natural resources to California Assembly Speaker John A. Perez, Deputy Director of the California Energy Commission's Efficiency and Renewables Division, and has held quite an impressive roster of other international energy and climate-related positions. And continuing on, Land and Water Committee, Dr. Carol Hart is Vice Chair of the California Coastal Commission and the former Director of Sonoma County Regional Parks. Her academic background is focused on the relationship of land use, open space, and climate change, and she is here virtually. And so, as I mentioned before, we'll invite you to fill out the committee form. We'll put the link in the chat. It's also available on the RCPA website on the homepage. But also, if you can pull out your phone, and that QR code will take you to that link if you'd like to do that. And again, I can physically sign you up as well. So that is the extent of my getting involved section. Please let us know if you have any questions regarding any of these sections or for any of the speakers. And thank you very much for your time.
Do you have any questions on
Yeah.
online, maybe to start?
Question?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
You said monthly. Have you made any decisions about day, time, that sort of thing?
Go
Should
for
I
it,
go
yeah.
up here to answer?
Sure.
All right. So no, we have not. We are, as Ross mentioned, we're planning to launch the committees in January and really want to work with our committee leads to find a regular time that works in their schedules and is also a good time for the rest of the committee. So finding that schedule is probably going to be a bit challenging, but we have a great group. And Eris, you have a
And I want to add on to that, that looking at what public transit schedules are like. So I may have to leave a little early to catch the bus home.
Okay.
So just,
Yeah.
I'm curious, Tanya, about the scope that these committees would get involved with. So for example, let's go to the buildings. Does that include things like microgrids when we talk about electricity?
It
Or
could.
would it be narrow?
Yeah, so we want this to be a very open, generate ideas kind of process. And it's really, and our board is very interested and really wants to get a wide range of options and ideas from the community. So we haven't like made it very prescribed. I mean, we're going to start out the committee meetings by going through, I talked about the mobilization strategy at the beginning. And so we want to make sure all the committees, they have the document, they know the basics of the mobilization strategy and the things that we've identified in there, but we don't want that to be a limiting factor. If the community has other ideas or priorities like microgrids or other things, that's really what we want to hear, come forward through this process. And then it's going to be our board that will take a look at all of those recommendations and come up with that final plan based on those inputs.
We did have a few
Great.
online questions, one technical, but will the county and cities integrate these goals on their general plan? And then the comment, the video emphasizes adaptation, the plan mitigation. How can we better integrate these two aspects?
Suzanne, do you want to? I don't know.
Sure, I mean, general plans get updated on a regular basis, though it depends on, it's up to each jurisdiction when and how they update them. I will say, as we've seen jurisdictions lately update their plans, there are climate elements that are deeply involved, I mean, deeply part of that work. So I think these things become sort of iterative, that this work would inform general plans will inform this work. And we've got two experts around general plans here too.
Yeah, and right now, City of Santa Rosa, I believe the county, and I think City of Brenner Park, among others, are in the process of updating their general plan. And I can't remember if it's state law or not, but all of them, I believe, have particularly a climate justice aspect to the general plan planning. So to the extent that we can, I don't see why we wouldn't integrate them.
And just so you know, the City of Roanoke Park's general plan update, I believe I was told last night by the Development Services Director that is the draft general plan, which does include an environmental justice aspect, does include a climate aspect, is available now on the city's website. So the theory is that the new council will be adopting that general plan in calendar 2023.
And just to add from the county perspective, yes, we are in the process of updating our general plan. I would say we're in our infancy. And so this would be fantastic to be able to feed into. And Chris, I believe you're right that it's environmental justice is required element. Climate is an optional element, but I think, we've already said that publicly as a board, we want to have a climate element. So.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, the other part of the question was adaptation sort of versus mitigation. And I do think this is a walk and chew gum situation, right? Like we need both. And so the work around land and water is very related to the adaptation piece with resiliency and carbon sequestration. The mitigation piece, maybe on the transportation side, is and on building stock is more mitigation related, but I don't think we're doing one at the exclusion of the other. The idea is to come up with those solutions because we do need both. Our climate, our greenhouse gas inventory, looking at that and looking at our climate goals, we're not going to get to zero in terms of emissions. We need that sequestration component too. So we, whether it's land management practices, vegetation management, addressing working lands. I see Carol has her hand up to perhaps address this as well. But I think the short answer is we do need both.
I've seen several hands raised up on the screen.
Yep. Go ahead and unmute Carol if you can hear us.
Great, thanks so much. I just want to make a couple comments, although what was presented today on the land and water section really focuses on mitigation and sequestration. Obviously, when it comes to land and water and climate change, it's so much bigger than that because the impacts on biodiversity, for example, from climate change can largely be addressed or by how we conserve our land, how we manage our land. And there is a pretty thorough report that was prepared by the county and also Ag and Open Space, trying to figure out if I could put it in the Q&A, a link to it, so you all could see. It's quite a comprehensive report on how we could be acquiring and managing our land and water in Sonoma County to address climate change. So if there is a way to do that, I'm trying to see, is there a way to post in the Zoom?
You should be able
Trying to
access the chat.
in the Q&A, or where is it? It's Q&A, but not chat. So I'm not quite sure how to do it, but maybe we could put it on the RCPA website, the link. But you can go on to it's called the Sonoma County Climate Resilient Lands Strategy. It's on the County Sonoma on the CAO website and on the Climate Action and Resiliency Division website. But I think hopefully we can put it up in connection with this effort. But I think absolutely it's all about adaptation and mitigation, and each feed off each other. So thanks for the opportunity to make a comment.
Thank you. And then raised, what is the criteria through which you will select an equitable committee?
So I can take that one. So Suzanne showed the structure slide that had the environmental justice advisors that will be supporting the work of all the program committees and the steering committee. And so we're going to really look to that group of advisors to help support the committees in creating a community engagement plan and outreach plan that really reaches all parts of our community, especially those members of the community that may have not been involved in these efforts in the past. So really looking to that environmental justice advisor function to help us do that. And of course, welcome any ideas or inputs that folks here or online have in terms of ways that we can do that really equitable engagement and outreach. So
Do you or Chair Rogers want to share sort of the meetings that we had with some key sort of environmental justice organizations and social justice organizations? And
yeah, if you'd like.
you share the meeting.
I appreciate that, but that is, we did do sort of a roundtable discussion, not just on who would end up being involved in this process, but really how do we design a process that was more equitable and welcomed as many voices as possible, while also understanding that there are voices that are drowned out in these discussions. And so it was a big discussion about how do we amplify some of those, how do we have touch points as we go through this process to ask ourselves, are we actually hearing from a broad swath of the community and from voices that might be too busy, might not have that megaphone. And so we've designed a process that we hope will, at the end of it, be an inclusive process that hears from what everybody across the community needs and hopefully addresses a lot of those concerns and make sure that we have all of those touch points.
Yeah, and just to add one point, which is that the org chart that you saw was not the org chart that we started with. We actually originally had sort of an equity committee, and the response from many of our equity partners was, that's not a separate thing. That has to be the responsibility of every single committee. And then also talked about hiring an equity consultant specifically to inform and educate the committees. So we really refined the process based on partners like the NAACP, LOCN, like we had a number of organizations that participated in those meetings.
Can I ask a related question, not to jump the line, but on the graphic, I noticed that the equity is integrated into all three of the subcommittees, and then the governmental partnership was off to the side. And I understand that the government partnership is not as open per se because you're targeting folks from governmental agencies and organizations. But the what was mentioned was the environmental justice trainings and workshops that might happen with the other committees, I would argue would be useful for those folks too. As one of them myself.
Yeah. Erin?
So tied on to this whole equity issue, I know, is there budgeting for stipends or transportation assistance for folks to participate in all of this? Because, right, I get paid to go to stuff like this, but lots of people, can't take time off work or have a babysitter or be able to, if all the meetings are here in Santa Rosa, that leaves out a good chunk of the county. So I know that a lot of organizations who are trying to get more diverse folks in the room compensate people for their time. And is there budget in this process for that?
Yeah, and I will say it's been an ongoing topic amongst us for how much in the budget. We recognize that there is that limitation if you don't compensate people fairly for their time. And at the same time, because we're doing such an open and inclusive process where literally anybody can join a committee, you theoretically could have hundreds of people join a committee that we might not just have funding for. So Suzanne has that onerous task of trying to find where that funding comes from, grants, other types of sources, and then helping us to develop what that nexus point is between paying enough people to where they can participate while also being fair and equitable in terms of the resources that you have allocated.
Could I ask, since you're on that topic, on the county side of the ledger, are you guys wrestling with this question of stipends and childcare for participation?
Yeah,
I'm wearing my Greenbelt Alliance Board of Directors hat.
we are, and I have fought very strongly for that, and it's been kind of a narrow 3-2 majority on with, yeah, I'll leave it at, we're still in development over how much is appropriate.
Because I can
and
tell
sort
you,
of which
Greenbelt
committee
Alliance on the board, we're starting to wrestle with that question on some of the work that we're doing on climate resilience. And how do we budget for this and how much, the questions, Chris, that you were bringing up.
Yeah, I think-
It's a tricky issue.
I think we all agree that in an ideal world, we would figure out how to make it work. And so I think that's what we're trying to do.
We do have some more online questions. Sounds like you guys can read it, but it sounds like the intent is to seek funding through a tax measure. Have other potential funding mechanisms been explored, or will they be explored throughout this process?
Sure, I can address that. We have not settled on a mechanism, but there are limitations to what local government has authority to do. So that's going to be part of the discussion, like going through what those options are, how much revenue and certain options will actually provide for that case, and then also how they poll. So it's knitting together a variety of things to see what is going to be palatable and what is going to be affordable.
Yeah. I think it is worth noting too that you've got RCPA that's leading this effort, but there is theoretically also an opportunity to kick ideas and recommendations down to cities that might have, in the county, that might have different rules. Like for instance, Santa Rosa is a charter city. If this looks at it from a countywide basis, and if there's an additional recommendation for things that charter cities should consider adding in, there's the mechanism to do that. We're looking at it as a global system from the county, and that does mean looking at what our tools are that we can package together to get there.
And looking at existing resources too, right? And how through this process over the next year, if things evolve in a certain way, that it becomes clear that this transit route could be redirected and repurposed in a better way to provide greater service. Like that's part of this discussion as well.
If I might ask Suzanne, other tax measures that are on the horizon for 2024, I can tell you the library sales tax 8% is, I believe, scheduled to be renewed in 2024. That's the one I know about because I'm married to a library commissioner.
Can she wait till 26? I'm not aware of other local measures yet at this point.
Smart.
I'm trying to figure out in my mind which committee to put my name down for, and I'm an expert in neither of those three. However, I am an expert in community engagement and outreach. I'm from Cool Petaluma, you might have heard of us. And I'm trying to think of, do you have a committee that does that type of a thing, or do you have?
Ross will want to talk to you about that for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
It's funny, we thought about different sort of more general committees.
Yeah.
We talked about an equity committee, but there's also this outreach and engagement committee idea. We wanted in all three, but we would welcome expert advice for sure.
Just jumping online briefly to address some of these. There's a comment regarding electrification and the resiliency adaptation angle. And then the relationship between SCTA RCPA directed effort and the County Administrative Officer's Climate Action and Resiliency Division.
Well, we actually have Hannah from the CAO's Climate Action and Resiliency Division here. So, I mean, I can just kick it over to you if you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say is that both Tanya, Suzanne, and BC, we have, and the rest of the staff in RCPA and SCTA have been amazing partners with the Climate Action Resiliency Division. We are a relatively new division that was created about a year ago. And so we're still, very much trying to get our feet settled while also taking the ball that was handed to us and running with it, and very much doing that in partnership and in coordination with the SCTA RCPA folks. We have pretty regular coordination, collaboration calls, participation in standing meetings by both Barbara and I, and also Jane Elias, who's the Energy and Sustainability side of things that has merged with the Climate Action Resiliency Division recently. So there's lots of overlap and lots of coordination, and that's I don't have much more detail beyond that, aside for when we've got related projects and overlapping projects. I at least can say on our parts we're doing our best to collaborate and coordinate where we can. I know BC was leading the greenhouse gas inventory update recently, and we're doing our own for our own municipal greenhouse gas inventory, and are doing our due diligence to make sure that they overlap and align where possible. So that's just an example.
One other thing to mention too, because I wonder if Tom's sort of thinking about the PG&E climate funding. One of the sort of primary focuses of the office has really been looking at our government operations and how we kind of green and improve that and reduce our actual County of Sonoma government greenhouse gas emissions, while also working with other partners. But things like, we've actually got Melanie from Regional Parks here too, applying for solar to install at parks to generate power and things like that. That was kind of, so this measure has a much broader scope because it's also, with city opportunities, for funding, and including potentially like private property owners that could have access to funding and transit systems and other things that are longer term.
This isn't actually my question. Someone else more brilliant thought of it, but I was wondering if you are thinking about doing polling, because polling is incredibly informative, and like you were saying, climate isn't one thing. So which of the many things that make up climate resonates most with the voters?
Right. I mean, the short answer is yes. The longer answer involves what's the timing, and so when and can we do more than one poll throughout this process. There's also more specific focus groups that could be part of a broader strategy, so that you've got your engaged committees, but then you can do more targeted focus groups to try and get at certain issues. So but that is in the plan.
And I will say, one of the things that as a member of RCPA, as the chair, that I'm not interested in is doing a measure that doesn't really accomplish the goals that we're going for. And so I think that there's a general sentiment or ethos that what we would like to do is craft a plan and say, this is what we think we need to do to meet what science says we need to accomplish, and then go and pull on that. But I think that there's a very powerful message if you go to the public and say, here's what we think we can accomplish for this amount of dollars, and here's what you'll get in terms of addressing climate change. And so, yes, I think that we'll need to do polling to determine when and how we go to the ballot and what the measure itself, what the funding source is. But I think in terms of the work that we're asking people to help us with in crafting what the measure will do, I think that needs to be driven more by science than it does by polling.
Jumping back online, expert support for equity sociologists who understands housing and transportation challenges of low-income people.
Yes,
I think,
absolutely.
yeah. And we'll work on the scheduling, definitely. And when prioritizing measures and actions, which would then need to be funded, does the RCPA plan use the social cost of carbon and an internal cost of resiliency to help in prioritization process?
I'm not deeply familiar with that exact social cost of carbon, but I do think exploring how these efforts affect the spectrum of our community so that you're not overburdening folks who may already be burdened. That's definitely high on our list of.
And I think there will be a number of different filters that we use. I think right now we're in the exploratory phase where we want to hear from people what their solutions are. And then I think once all of that's on the table, it gives us a chance to talk about how do we maximize the impact and what types of filters do we want to use to make sure that we're not inequitably applying the resources that we're trying to seek out. So that's how I would answer that.
And like Chris said, we believe in data, we believe in metrics. And so if there are any analytical lenses that you want to bring forward for us to utilize, we are fully in support of that.
Moving on. Regarding that, and then will the community-led steering committee and or government partners committee meetings be open to the public? Yeah. Yep.
I think you have a question out here in the back.
Oh, I appreciated at the beginning you outlining phase one of like what do we want to be, what do we want to see create, or on what projects want to be funded, and then phase two of figuring out the funding model, and that's kind of an often comment not built into the proposal presentation. So I'm curious, are those really like linear phases? Are they happening together? Are the committees also responsible for helping figure out the funding model, or are they mostly focused on projects? Like, who is determining the funding model, and how are different people giving input to that?
So I think on the funding model, I think what I'm interested in seeing is a number of different ideas that people can bring forward. I actually think that this might be the area where the government advisors section is going to have the most utility, because there are a lot of rules around what we can and can't put on the ballot, right? And for instance, we're going to have to balance for certain jurisdictions, if it's a sales tax that's recommended, certain jurisdictions are close to their sales tax cap, right? And so I think that that's where, when we look at what the total impact is, that's where I see that kind of coming out of that high level kind of discussion. But I think right now, especially as people bring forward ideas, I think nothing is off the table. And Carrie knows this, we were looking at a single-use plastics tax at one point, which I think is a great thing to throw on the table. That may or may not be something that we ultimately want to pursue when we look at the totality of what we're trying to accomplish. But I think we need to have that discussion at least.
Yeah, I would just add to that, instead of like passively waiting for ideas to come, to proactively reach out to experts and look for more ideas, because I think everybody pretty much knows that a sales tax is very regressive, and I've heard equity said a lot here, but the actualization of equity is not putting the burden on low-income folks by passing a sales tax. It also feels ironic to be looking at a sales tax because that incentivizes increased consumption, which we know causes climate change. So it feels a little bit worrisome to put the burden on low income while incentivizing something that is causing the thing we're trying to fix in the first place.
I think it's a great point.
Thinking bigger about that, I feel like really needs to be prioritized early on. If May 2024 is the goal.
I think one other point too is that sometimes creative funding solutions may require some kind of legislative solution or even clarification of legislation. And so we might want to sort of have any creative solution conversations early so that we would have legislative cycles that could sort of move forward in time. But I appreciate that feedback. Maybe that would be like an early agenda item for the committees. We do have our counsel for RCPA, SCPA, Corey O'Donnell, who has done a lot of work with the state legislature in terms of looking for those creative funding solutions. And we've talked through some ideas internally, but look forward to bringing that to the community. Thank you.
So are we having any conversations with our legislative representatives at the state level and possibly MTC at the regional level in terms of assistance that might come in the form of statewide legislation on this problem?
The answer is yes, and I'll actually point to work that SCTA, RCPA did last year on a Senator Dodd bill that actually gave taxing authority to RCPA, which they had never had before. That was
Which
to
I'm
help
well
set the-
aware of.
Yeah, that was to help set the table for these types of conversations to make it easier, because otherwise we would have had to have gathered signatures for an effort or asked the board to put it on.
Yeah.
So they're very aware, is the way to put
Good.
that. Yes.
Continuing online, does any tax measure that doesn't dedicates funds for climate, does it require a 2/3 vote for?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And will the North Bay Electric Auto Association be involved or other EV enthusiasts?
They're all welcome.
We certainly,
Everybody's welcome.
we certainly hope so.
Join us.
Yes.
Ross, can I jump in with a logistic question?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around, and it kind of ties to the points that Carrie was making as well. But so if this needs to be neatly ready, tied up with a bow come May, that gives committees in theory 5 meetings, 1 per month with
2024.
May
Oh,
2024.
I see.
One year
Sorry.
guidance.
Well, thank you. But what is the like logistic plan for going from soliciting input from folks to a proposed funding measure? Like I'm still struggling to wrap my head around so solicit input and then what's the next logistic step? Is it first figure out how the money will be spent and what projects will be and where money will go towards? Or is it,
I think if it's anything like Measure DD, which reauthorized Measure M, the Go Sonoma Act, one of the things that was done was you solicit the input and then you create first and foremost the broad categories that the funding is going to go to, with then the ability to have specific things enumerated within the categories. I don't know if Suzanne is looking at it the same way, but that seemed to be one of the more effective ways for us to craft that. And so, especially when we look at the breadth of the ideas that we're seeing, it could be as simple as the filter that everybody decides to use is fund the things that have the largest impact first, right? If that's the lens that we decide to go with, then the science is going to dictate what we're going to fund. And as you kind of go down the list of what's going to work, you run out of funding as you get towards the bottom, right? It could be that the group decides we're going to put a certain amount into resiliency, a certain amount into adaptation, a certain amount into alternative modes of transportation. I don't know, whatever the group decides to go with. But I think that all will probably likely happen at the beginning of 2024, with then the opportunity to have a couple of months of some tweaking so that folks are comfortable when it's time for ultimately the RCPA board to vote on, are we going to put this before the voters? I don't know if you want to add anything, Suzanne.
The only thing I would add is part of the discussion about figuring out priorities within the community is assessing costs for implementation and factoring that in as well, so that you've got, what people care most about, how you deliver it, what it costs to do, and then prioritize that within an expenditure plan. And, as Chair Rogers said, you get to the, you figure out what your funding mechanism is and project what you think that can raise. And you have to draw a line at some point and say, we can fund what's above this line and what's below, we're not going to be able to do.
I think there are other variables we're also going to have to talk about just to make sure everything's on the table, right? Like, how long is whatever funding source we're putting forward, how long is that going to be in existence? Are we talking 10 years, 20 years? Are we talking tying it to our greenhouse gas emission inventory where we say this will be in effect until we're 90% below 1990 levels? We'll talk about all of that, but those are all the mechanics of how it actually gets implemented. And I think kind of what I'm trying to put across, and I think Suzanne will agree with, we've got to start with how do we achieve the goal that we're going for? And then how do we craft a measure that is guided by those principles?
That's all incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
I'm also curious about the logistic piece. How does the information that y'all collect from these committees be fed into the end result. Has that piece been thought through, or?
I guess I don't really see much mystery in it, because we're gonna take information, we're gonna categorize it, and we're gonna, I think, what I've heard from my board members is they want options. They want solid information from the committees, from the public, from our general sessions around this. And it's incumbent on staff to package that, for lack of a better term, in a manner in which they can, back in the day, we did dots on maps, we did, like, we'll do forums where people can provide feedback, and we'll document it all. I don't know. If you have other ideas on better ways to go about it, we're happy to hear those for sure.
And at the end of the day, a 2/3 vote is an almost impossible task to get by if you have opposition.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be one of the filters that we're all using is, can we all live with what's been crafted? And the only way to make sure that that's taking place is if you have these conversations in the open.
There will be some opposition.
Probably not.
Oh, come on.
Depending on the funding source, there'll absolutely be opposition.
We should start meeting with Dan Drummond early, right?
I have another logistical. Are the committees doing the additional community outreach? Or who, because I've heard like additional community engagement, or the EJ advisors creating a community engagement plan. So like, who is responsible for doing outreach to people who are not on the committee?
So it will probably be the committee members and RCPA staff supporting that. So based on that engagement plan, like, we may decide we want to do some listening sessions. And so we'll work with the committee leads to organize and plan those. We are also planning to do probably 2 to 3 bigger community workshops at different points in the process. And we'll want to work with our EJ advisors and the committees to, set those up in the most effective way possible. Maybe we hold them at different locations throughout the county. Look at ways to time them and schedule them so that they're accommodating to the most people possible. So it's a combination of RCPA staff and
And one last online comment that we saw, just looking at highest priority actions and other existing funding sources opportunities. So, to help identify the gaps for funding the highest priority actions. I think that Chris, Jared addressed that.
Yeah, and I also say one of the things that could be an input or should be an input is looking at what funding is available from the state and the federal government also. There's a lot right now with the Inflation Reduction Act, and looking at what those gaps are among what's being funded, what local jurisdictions, the counties, and the cities are already funding, and using this as an opportunity to kind of hit what's missed. That might be part of the discussion as well.
And I just want to go back to what Carrie was saying. There's also a lot of outreach that has happened on things that have happened in the last year or two. So we don't want to let that go fallow, right? So if it's the county's the study that Carol mentioned earlier, there was a good amount of community engagement related to that. If it's the general plan for Santa Rosa or Rohnert Park, like, there's knowledge out there that has been derived from conversations in the community that, people want to see stuff happen. They just don't want to be asked what they want to have happen. That it doesn't stop there. They want to see it implemented. So I also, just personal preference, like, I want to err on the side of hearing from folks for sure, but I also don't want to disregard the work that's come before, especially in the last 2 to 3 years. And take that to heart so that we're not going back to the same group saying, so what do you think about climate, when they've just been engaged in a discussion about, how Open Space District is working on climate issues. So I think there's a lot of information out there that will help guide this process as well.
And I just want to add, I mean, Eris, or she had to leave, I
Yeah.
think, but, you know, was very involved in development of Vision Zero, right? And, you know, Santa Rosa has a bicycle and pedestrian safety master plan, you know, from 2018 or something. So we have a lot of plans that unfortunately have all of these great projects and great ideas and are kind of sitting on shelves with no funding to mobilize them. And those plans came from community engagement, right? From going out and talking to the community and saying, where do you need a sidewalk? Where do you need a crosswalk? Where do you need a bike lane? So, you know, also, I think that's one of the great things about the government partners. And I also appreciate the point, I think it was Anna that you raised about equity in the government partner process as well. You know, how do we then feed those plans into this as well and create some eligibility for local funding?
Practical question. Is there a date by which committee rosters will be solidified? Because sort of the nature of committee work is you want to have a stable group to work with. So are we putting a deadline out there for applications, or how's that going to work?
I think the answer is no, because while they may not be Brown Act meetings that are super formal, and they are going to all be public meetings, so anybody can attend. And I think at least the idea behind it was come one, come all. I do appreciate that makes it more challenging perhaps to reach agreement if you've got changing characters throughout the process. But I think we can talk more about that if we need to.
So are they going to be noticed? Has your council given you any advice?
They are public meetings. They are not Brown Act.
Okay.
One thing that I think that will be helpful for management, and maybe I'm dating myself by using a word like rewind, because that doesn't exist anymore, but like, you know, you don't want to rewind to sort of cover topics that are, so even if there may be new people, right, like you sort of ask them to accept the work of the committee up until that point, and to then, you know, move forward with new conversations, because otherwise you definitely can get sort of stuck in the washing machine cycle, just going around and around.
Well, and the other part of that is again, if the goal is at the end of the process for each committee to present a number of recommendations, from whom are those recommendations coming?
From an inclusive process.
And I will say our committee leads are gonna have to be very adept at herding cats. So thank you.
I like that metaphor. That's a
Socks
good
on
one.
an
That's
octopus.
good.
Will there be any facilitated collaboration, coordination across committees?
Well, the steering committee will certainly be a place where the leads from all the committees are on the steering committee. So that'll be one place. And we envision that steering committee also identifying, is there a need to have a more, organized meeting across the committees? Hard to say, but at least at the steering committee, they'll be looking at coordinating across and integrating those recommendations.
One might envision at the end of the process, before the recommendation goes to the board, that there would be some sort of a summit of all the committees. That's just a thought.
Yeah. Well, and the RCPA board is a public meeting where they will get reports regularly on this, and there will be an opportunity there as well.
I'm starting to be a little bit unclear about exactly what my commitment of time would be if I signed up. I don't know, is that in the form, or is it? I thought I had a clear idea, and then I heard public engagement also, and I don't know, I'm not quite clear.
So we've said the committees will meet monthly for an hour, hour and a half, and probably a few hours between meetings, depending on what phase the committee is in terms of reviewing materials, or, maybe talking to folks in your network to get feedback on some of the recommendations. I think in terms of the community engagement piece, we're really RCPA staff working with the environmental justice advisors. We want to try and do as much of that kind of groundwork as possible to support the committee. So not expecting you all to do a lot of that work yourselves. That's how we do it. So.
We did have almost out of time, and just talking about asking about what we can do with limited funding, and I think that's been a address. Bit of outreach. Any last comments before we close?
Is there any thoughts on how we get funding to run the ballot measure when we get on the ballot? It's the most amazing measure ever, of course. Would that be like fundraising for that, or are there any funding streams for running that campaign?
That's not a public process.
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer. Anytime a city or a county does a ballot measure, there's up to the point of it being approved. The jurisdiction can help with the crafting of it and help with the messaging of it. But the moment that the jurisdiction puts it on the ballot, it has to be a completely separate entity that picks the ball up and runs with it. And so we can talk about that at some point. I think that the likely answer is that you got folks like the two of us who have worked kind of in that space, that somebody's going to have to pick up that slack and just start the process. But yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
The other thing though, we will need money for would be to actually put it on the ballot, which is not a cheap thing to do. It's a countywide measure. And so that might be a request to the county, for general fund dollars or something like that, one-time funding.
It's much cheaper if you win.
That's true. Then you get to pay yourself back.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Do you have, Chair or Vice Chair, any last message or?
No, I just really want to thank people for being here and for participating, and the thoughtful questions are making us continue to think about how we're going to craft this and be as inclusive as possible. And I think you'll see that for a long time through this process, that we're all trying to figure out how to do the best measure possible to do the most good for the most people. And so if you see a touch point where you're like, well, actually, I think we can do this better, or actually you're not thinking of this perspective, I hope that you'll bring that forward to us and feel welcome to bring that forward to us. And again, to the point I made, a 2/3 bar is nearly impossible for you to clear if you don't have a clear purpose, a clear group of people who are behind the measure and really pushing, and really broad support for people. There's just offhand, there's about 26% of people in the county who will vote against everything out of hand. And when you have a 2/3 measure, that means you really have to work hard to get people on the same page.
And I would just say that what I'm taking away from this meeting is gratitude and excitement. I'm just so grateful that all of you showed up here in real life, in person tonight. And I'm really, really excited to work with you. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Tanya and Suzanne and Ross, who've been amazing. I mean, we are really excited about this and committed to this, but you can't do it if you don't have an awesome team who really sees the value in this. And there's so much frustration, I think, just so you know, from local elected officials and from staff, like, we know all the things that we need to do. We know all the things that we want to do, and we simply don't have the revenue and the funding source to do it. And so this, I think, could be very hopeful. It could inject energy into this community. It could create jobs. It could advance equity, and it could meaningfully mitigate climate change, which is really exciting. So thank you all to all of our awesome team at RCPA. And thank you all of you for showing up.
7 o'clock. I like